Hello, welcome to the Internet Seriously. I'm Lucian Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Kieran McCarthy in London.
And today we're going to be talking about the Global Anti-Scam Alliance. Emily and I have just come back from Brussels, where there's been a new meeting, and we'll be talking a bit about the ins and outs of that. Kieran's going to be talking about the use of video in social media in political campaigning at the moment. If you recall, Kieran is standing as an MP for the Liberal Democrats for Putney. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about another niche topic in Gaza. Well, in fact, it was quite a big topic called the fraud attack chain.
But first of all, to Emily, who will be talking about the Global Anti-Scam Alliance.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. So Lucian and I and Mark and Nathan have just got back from Brussels, where we were attending the Global Anti-Scam Summit. In fact, the DNS Research Federation was one of the sponsors. And it brought together like a tremendous number of people. It was really quite an exciting event. There was about 350 registrations in person, and more than 1,000 registrations online for a 2-day summit. And it really brings together primarily people from law enforcement, from financial sector. A lot of the big platforms were there. And so there was a real sense of energy and a sense of determination to try and sort of turn the tide on scams. One of the, factoids that came up is that the value of scams alone is $1 trillion a year, and that in consumer research, consumers are desperate to see criminals actually going to jail. And all of that is, to make it a success, people are going to have to share data on a scale geographically in a timely way that just isn't happening at the moment and isn't close to what the criminals are able to achieve.
And so you ran a couple of workshops personally. You were heading up those. Do you want to talk a bit about those workshops?
Yeah, so thank you. We organised an afternoon of workshops. So the story of the workshops was going to be like, data sharing. Everyone's talking about it, no one's doing it. And because actually most of the people there are not lawyers, we had a show of hands. There was one lawyer in the room, and actually he quickly left. And most of the people there are quite operational. And so what they're doing is they're feeling the frustration of like, why can't we just get this done? And what we wanted to do was bring a ton of lawyers in and explain just how complicated the legal landscape is. I think we slightly overdid it, because I certainly felt incredibly depressed at how complicated it is, how difficult it is to get through the legal hurdles. You've got GDPR, different interpretations, different appetite for risks, all sorts of unfortunate court decisions, which really freak people out so much, because if you breach GDPR, you have turnover-based fines. And for Americans, particularly in a sort of very litigious society, they're just like, we don't want to go there.
Can I just ask Kieran a rhetorical question? Kieran, can you imagine why it would be a problem to share data between organisations in this day and age when we're seeing cybercrime sort of spiralling?
Well, I'll tell you, before I answer that, I recall very clearly when I worked at ICANN, we would always joke and actually enact. We say, if we need to make progress this meeting, let's make sure there's no lawyers in the room. And we'll make the decision. And then we'll bring the lawyers in, and then we'll make it legal. Yeah. And that's how we got things done.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, Emily used to be a lawyer, but
I'm laughing a lot at this because
I can't honestly answer that question as Emily's husband, but
it was great actually, Kieran, because one of the most colourful voices on that first panel was from a British lawyer called Eleanor Dews, who had spent a long time in the Foreign Office as a lawyer, so she's a real expert in this area of law. She's now in private practice, and she was just saying, look, the whole that where we are in the legal arguments is just a massive fiction. It's just like angels on pinheads. If you really convince yourself, if you step through the law, you are never going to get to yes on data sharing. And yet, there are lots of successful examples. And she was like, we have a very practical and pragmatic regulator here in the UK, and actually the way through, the common factor, because we also heard from 3 or 4 successful data sharing projects, one of them being BT with Share and Defend, a group in the Netherlands, and CIFAS, which is sort of very much financial services and retailers here in the UK. And the common factor was they'd all involved privacy regulators or lawyers in a sort of a kind of can-do way, and they were all saying you've got to push back against the lawyers, because actually if you go for a zero risk type of approach, you're never going to get there. If you say we are doing this, how do we minimise our risk, then the lawyers are kind of then helping you to solve the problem, and it can be done. That was really the message that we wanted to get across.
But there is
it's the age-old issue, is that the lawyers are there to provide advice. But what you could do is reach an agreement on what needs to happen, and then have lawyers make sure that it works.
Yeah. Do you think there's a
cultural the lawyers in front of it?
Do you think there's a cultural difference, Kieran, between the sort of American lawyer-led business where it's almost like the lawyers are insuring you against sort of doing the wrong, what could fractionally and marginally be the wrong thing, versus the kind of pragmatic, founded in public school ethos Brit who sort of says, oh, it should be all right?
It depends. I mean, if you in Silicon Valley with startups, they are a very different breed of lawyer that will literally figure out how to make it happen. But when it comes to very large corporations, they spend a lot of their time worrying about the cost of everything, and so tend to sort of get in the way of it. So it depends what the sort of culture is, and obviously a lot of the big companies in this case will be what used to be Silicon Valley startups and now are some of the largest corporations in the world. So they have in their own sort of internal cultural struggles between the people that set these things up, go fast and break things, to now the vast billions of dollars and risks associated with making any wrong move. So there's a massive internal struggle inside.
I totally agree, Kieran. I mean, I think my observation from Gaza, Brussels this time was it was very American, it was very big tech, but also new, young thinking, a lot of young tech people and entrepreneurs and power executives in those big companies who are much younger than us, who are like, this has got to change, we've got to do something. So I think we are potentially at an inflection point. And I must say, and I'll be talking a little bit about it later, but data sharing, everyone's trying to stop talking about data sharing and all the repercussions that has with things like Cambridge Analytica, where I think people literally have PTSD about data sharing, and they're trying to rebrand that whole thing as what they call threat signals sharing threat signals. It's kind of the same thing, because it's not personal identifiable information, it's not PII. So I think we are heading towards a new horizon, and I'm hoping that we in our organisation, with our platform DAP.live, we've been selected by the Gaza community as the platform of choice for the new cybercrime exchange, which hopefully, fingers crossed, is launching next year. We're really excited about that, and we'll be talking more about that. But I'll be talking about that in a minute. But the first thing is I'd like to introduce your topic, Kieran, which is we're going to talk about, we're less than 1 week off an election where I've got mixed feelings about you getting elected, because I know that if you get elected, you've then got responsibility elsewhere, and you're going to be sitting in Parliament, and we're going to just be getting any
Will you
time.
remember your friends, Kieran?
Will
it change you?
I'll be clinging on to my friends.
Right, yeah. You'll have no choice, though, but because we'll be lobbying you and shouting at you about everything that's going wrong, as though it's your fault. But anyway, what we're specifically talking about, because Nigel Farage is rising and rising again, and that caught our interest, and you wanted to talk about the use of video in social media in politics. I'm interested in what you have to say about that. Thanks.
Yeah, well, it'd be this election will be very interesting. So my campaign has been sort of trying to focus more on more digital means, because our rationale is that's how a lot of people, learn about stuff that's going on. If you actually look at the stats, most people get their news now from these short form videos. And of course, the political campaign in this country is sort of stuck in the past. We keep poking bits of paper through letterboxes. So it'd be interesting to see the impact of video. So of course, I've been watching other people's videos and the use of videos. And there's several components. One I thought was the Farage thing is quite interesting, that people have been using AI to create these mock Minecraft videos. I don't know whether you've seen this.
I haven't seen
it's
it.
Basically,
there's
a whole range of them.
Minecraft? What is it? How are they using that with them?
Well, they're pretending they're using and I don't know if you watch many Minecraft videos, but you have a sort of, the person in the green screen, and the game going on. So they've been it's been a satire, and they're sort of going into, Farage has been going into Rishi Sunak's house that he's built and putting TNT in it. And,
right.
And this has grown and grown and grown. So you've had like Boris Johnson, and they're using AI and their voices and their images, and it actually is pretty realistic. It could theoretically be them playing Minecraft and playing these stupid games. And frankly, considering where we're going with political discourse, it wouldn't surprise me if the next election is held over Minecraft memes. But there you go. But in terms of sort of the wider video thing, it's quite interesting in that a lot of people are trying to move to video, because that's how you actually connect with people and people actually listen to it. And there's a wide range from really very amateurish video that comes across as a little bit embarrassing, to highly professional video that sometimes comes across as too glitzy or too expensive. It's very interesting.
You've been using video in your campaign, Kieran. I just saw this morning you've got a new one out about a proposed housing development, chomping up of the small bit of green space in a housing development. What sort of response are you seeing from your own videos, both among the constituency, the voters, and your own party?
Well, it's massively positive, but one of the crazy things, I mean, this is anything at scale, is that, and also on social media, is that you don't really know. You're in your own bubble. So I've had huge numbers of people, like thousands of people liking it and watching it, and then dozens of people sending me notes saying, great. But what does that mean? It's very hard to know. Well, you'll only know really at the end of the day. But you do, though, at the same time. I now understand why these crazy influencers watching their likes, because you watch
it. Very addictive, isn't it?
How many people? It's weirdly addictive, and yet it doesn't really mean anything at the same time.
Because how many of those people are going to be your constituents, or the voters who could possibly vote for you?
Oh, well, then that opens up the whole issue of all the constraints that these social media networks are trying to put around elections, and you have to verify yourself, and then they put you through into a different bucket, and all of their policies on that are a mess as well. Yeah. There's a lot of it's definitely the future of campaigning, for sure, but it is very messy right now. And then if you combine it, at the moment, AI is just being used satirically. But I do wonder what it's going to look like, especially with the American election coming up, where people are more advanced and have got a lot more money.
Yeah, and certainly,
it'll be very interesting to see.
Certainly, Kieran, in the Global Anti-Scam Summit that Lucian and I have just been there were lots of examples of deep fakes being used to scam people. And of course, in the political arena, the same techniques can be used to really... not in a satirical way, but as serious messages to trick people. And
well, I would say that they're going to put out an AI video of President Biden looking like he's a bit senile, but he's done it himself.
He's done it for himself. Oh my goodness me! Yeah, I was
sad
just listening to that this morning. Very sad news, and
very sad.
Yeah, but
problematic.
And coming from the world of political campaigning, and those influencing videos, we were hearing a lot this week, Lucian, about the fraud attack chain. And that seemed to be a real buzzword. We were seeing a lot of graphical kind of examples of the fraud attack chain. Can you explain to us what that means and what the relevance is in the fight against cyber crime.
Yes, absolutely. And this was a big theme in Gaza, was what some of the most prominent speakers from, the heads of big social media organizations and others, I won't go into those sort of details at this stage, were talking about what one called the fraud attack chain, and others called the sort of cyber criminal workflow. And basically what they're saying is that different actors in a chain of fraud actually have different visibility to what's going on. So just to break that down a bit, you start with step one: the criminal will build infrastructure. Now, what does that mean? They'll register a domain name, they'll register a company name, they'll put together a website, and there are tools to enable them to do this. They can build websites in seconds and remove them in seconds. They can register bogus companies and move around directors and re-register directors. We heard examples of some of the biggest scam companies based in the UK, with a director cropping up and then a director resigning and disappearing. And of course, you try and get company's house and people like that into the process to help you, and the scam is long gone, long been killed. Step two, create a credible identity. So they build a business, they create a credible identity, and at that stage, you don't know anything's potentially going to go wrong.
I don't know if you can hear, Kieran, we've got a fire alarm going
sorry,
on.
we just had a fire alarm there. I don't know if we're going to keep
I wondered what was happening.
It's part of the fraud attack
so
chain.
in step two, we're going to create a credible identity, and at that stage, you don't know if anything's actually gone wrong, because that's just anybody building a business and building an online presence. That may be creating a credible identity, maybe registering an email address, setting up some social media accounts, and there are individual step sort of activities that will try and help protect that phase. There's a new thing called Know Your Customer. So basically saying people who set up social media accounts, people who register email addresses, the providers of those services should work harder to make sure that they know the human that's behind that. And there are all sorts of reasons why that will and won't work as well. And that comes to Kieran's point about AI. A credible identity could be an AI, an AI personality. And we saw people showing videos of who we thought was themselves talking to their own staff in Zoom meetings, and none of them were real. They were all synthetic voices, and they were all synthetic appearances.
What were they saying? They were saying you need about 3 seconds of someone's voice to be able to create a synthetic, very persuasive, plausible version of them.
Yeah, and examples of somebody's boss on a Zoom call saying to their finance director, you need to ship $50,000 immediately. I can't go into it, but everyone here agrees. And you've got a finance director looking at what they think is their boss and sounding like their boss, and it's not. That is step two, where the industry is taking a lot of individual effort to do that. The next step is actually engaging with the community, and that is,
the victim, isn't it?
The victim and the community around the victim, and that involves social engineering or advertising, and at those pinch points people can do more. Then there's the execute, which some are claiming is only really visible to the bank. That's the point where money is elicited from a victim. And then what some describe as clean up, meaning take down the whole thing and disappear, because scams are really worth that investment, because you build all the infrastructure automatically and quickly. You take a big amount of money and then you disappear off the face of the planet.
And the really interesting 2 points I took away from those kind of talks were: the further to the left you can intervene, yes, i.e. at the point where people are building infrastructure and establishing identity, the more disruption you can put in. If you're getting that, and the second point is that even the hugest social media companies in the world are really only starting to see the scams at the engagement point, maybe a bit of the creating identity point. So they're already late to the party. And even though they have enormous scale, they're saying we're not seeing the whole piece of the puzzle, and that comes back to the first conversation we had about the necessity for people across different sectors and silos to share this information, because that attack chain is going across all sorts of different industries who don't traditionally talk even to people within their own sector, let alone people across different ones.
And this comes to my sort of passion project, which is, one executive there was urging us not to do stratospheric things, but to try and do smaller things. And I'm interested, Kieran, as a non-executive director of Nominet, who run the .uk domain name in the UK, a very successful, one of the more secure domain names in the world. Your view on this sort of, how can the people who control that infrastructure around domain names and websites, how can they do more earlier? My reasoning is it's a very reactive industry. It waits to receive notices, and it tends to sort of game around the fidelity of threat notices or takedown notices. And we're trying to provide services for those providers in the industry, and sorry if this is getting complicated, to actually see the stuff at the same time as everybody else, to see the threats earlier. What's your view on that, the possibility of that, and against that culture, 2 decades at ICANN of just sort of resisting change and trying to say, look, this is not our fault?
Yes, it's very interesting what you're saying. As my brain was going through that, I was thinking possibly the best way to shut this down would be, the whole point of this is to make money. If you can then, at the point in which a group tries to make the money, as soon as it hits the financial industry, that's the point in which you can shut it down. And then they'll gain nothing for all their effort. But then how do you get to that point? I think there is a way, and this would be through careful data sharing, where as soon as there attempts to be a transaction, the bank has access to potential series of red flags from everybody else in the chain. So if there is a pattern notice, let's say a Nominet, and there's a pattern notice of .uk domains being registered, and you think this is a little unusual. The issue, of course, we don't want to shut down legitimate social media accounts. You don't want everybody having to go through everything all the time. You don't want there to be too many checks on getting a domain name. You don't want there to be too many checks registering a company's house, but this is sort of ebb and flow of commerce. But if there are red flags, and at the point in which someone tries to make money, they say, okay, red flag here, red flag here, red flag here, red flag here, stop the transaction. That would be, I think, a way of doing that careful balance between stopping the scams and allowing the free flow of commerce.
Thank you
very much. But that would require to shift their thinking.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you've actually outlined very much the ambitions of the new Cybercrime Exchange, which is about taking very small amount of data. So you're not data sharing, you're threat signals sharing, but making sure that is collected in what we also urge is a decentralized way. We're not proposing to have a mono database. It's actually enabling people to augment their own private data with threat signals and very high level threat signals from others. So, but more on that later. And I'm glad that just thinking it through, Kieran, you kind of came up with the solution that we've been working on for a good year or so. So I'm delighted about that. So I think we've reached the end now. Emily, do you have any final thoughts? I can see that something's...
I'm thinking, we haven't asked our sort of Room 101 or Guilty Pleasure. Who's got one to answer? Who hasn't? Luce, have you done your Guilty Pleasure other than porn?
I'm sorry, I object to the innuendo in that question. I think
that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, but
what's your guilty pleasure?
Other than porn, and you're saying that as my wife, as though you know that I watch a load of porn, which I do not. But it's like, no. The question is meant to be, except for porn, what would be your guilty pleasure?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And my guilty pleasure is I'm kind of into video production as a hobby and as a sideshow, and I love that. And the best funded video production workshops and sites tend to be extreme American Christian churches and the video teams behind that, who have lots of time on their hands to produce these fantastic tutorials and workshops. And so I'm watching lots and lots of videos about how to use cameras, how to use and bits of equipment and stuff like that. And they're saying, and so, in your business, in your campaign, your politics, or your church, you can use this. So it's always slipping in the thing about the church. But I actually love them. I think it's a fantastic job. And they actually invest a lot in that, and into what would otherwise be very expensive videography and production courses. So that's my... that's my guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, what does that do to your targeted advertising algorithm? Are you now kind of like marked out as a huge enthusiast evangelical Christian?
My targeted advertising algorithm is very affected by certain things like my age anyway. Certainly in YouTube, I am getting a lot of Christian-y type, churchy type videos about everything. And there are things that are affected by what my wife would buy online.
Using your account.
Using my account.
Which I do.
And that leads to some quite extraordinary advertising suggestions.
So they've got Lucian down as a sort of evangelical Christian cross-dresser.
I think probably within the marriage, but I think probably I might do this with my wife, like once a month, switch accounts just to see the world according to, how they perceive the world according to my wife, and give her mine the world perceived according to me. It would be very interesting to see what different worlds we inhabit online.
Thanks for that.
Exactly.
Anyway, so thank you very much. That's the end of this episode of The Internet Seriously. We've been talking about the Global Anti-Scam Alliance in Brussels. We've also been talking about the use of video in political campaigning and social media. And finally, what we call the fraud attack chain, a subject amongst cyber security experts in how to share better threat signals throughout the attack chain. So thank you very much, and goodbye from me, Lucian Taylor in Oxford.
From me, Emily Taylor in Oxford.
And from me, Kieran McCarthy in London.